One of the most striking commitments made by Liz Truss as she became Prime Minister was that she would aim to spend 3% of our national income on defence by 2030. And just to explain what that means, it's around a 60% increase in real terms after allowing for inflation over the next 8 years. And very roughly speaking, it will require about another £150 billion in order to finance the increase from where we are now to where she's aiming to be in 2030. And it throws up lots of questions, of course, which my report looks at in a bit more detail. Of course, it raises questions about what that money, extra money, will be spent on. But it also raises questions about how you deliver on that increase, because it really is a transformation, a turnaround. It's something, a scale of increase we haven't seen in the UK since the 1950s, and even in the 1950s that increase was reversed rather quickly. So most of all, I think it means if you want to get an increase in military capability that's commensurate with all that extra resource, you need to plan it right, you need to prepare it properly, you need to phase it in over time, and that will require transformation on how we recruit people into the armed forces, as well as all the investment in infrastructure and equipment and everything else which goes along to do that. And done right, it will of course produce a very substantial increase in British military capability. But it is not necessarily the case it will be done right, and certainly the worst of all worlds would be lots of extra money and not much extra capability. And then finally, the report, I think, highlights that the question of how you finance that increase in military capability is absolutely critical, because over the last 70 years, the UK has benefited from a so-called peace dividend. So the share of our national income going to defence has gone down. And that's one of the main reasons we've been able to afford as a nation to increase spending on health and welfare without increasing the overall burden of taxation very much. If we're now looking at a decade in which defence spending is taking a bigger share of national income, then we're going to have to finance it one way or another, either through cutting other areas of public spending, international or domestic, or indeed by raising taxation. And we haven't heard anything yet from the incoming government as to how they plan to finance this very considerable increase in defence spending. But to be credible, that increase is going to have to be one that's affordable, and it's one which is properly financed. I think one of the things I will be expecting from the new government is to look again at the integrated review of foreign defence and security policy. It's not that old, but the big change since the IR was brought out is clearly the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has told us a lot about Russian risk appetite as well as Russian capabilities, and those point in slightly different directions. We've learned, I think, a little bit more about China, but I'm not sure that China's position is fundamentally different from what it was at the IR. I think our perception of Russia is, and therefore I think it's right, and I don't think the government should hold a whole all singing, all dancing integrated review. I think that would be a distraction right now, but I think it is useful to look at some sort of new chapter to the IR which makes a course adjustment and clearly also a budgetary adjustment to reflect what's happening right now in Ukraine. I think in many ways right now in relation to Ukraine, we're in 1915. It feels like this could well be a long war of attrition, and it's hard to know what your long-term strategy is in 1915 because you don't know how World War I is going to end up, and I think that's the case today. What I think I am clear about is that the top defence priority in the next years is to make sure we can do everything possible, first of all, to help Ukraine in their struggle against Russia, but secondly, to ensure that our forces, our armed forces, are as capable as possible to deter and, if necessary, to fight against Russia in the near term, in the next years, because unfortunately the risks of major war on the European continent are higher than they have been for many decades.